Son, that waitress took care of me. Chapter 1. The Diner on Maple Street. The bell above the diner door chimed softly as Mrs. Eleanor Whitmore stepped inside, leaning heavily on her cane. The afternoon sun filtered through the large front windows, catching the dust in golden streaks across the black and white checkered floor. Maple Street Diner had not changed much in 40 years. The booths were still red vinyl, the coffee still strong, and the smell of bacon still lingered in the air like a memory that refused to fade. But Eleanor had changed. At 78, her silver hair was neatly brushed, her coat slightly too big for her shrinking frame. She hesitated near the entrance, her eyes scanning the crowded room. Every booth seemed full, every table occupied. Conversations buzzed loudly. Laughter rang out. She turned slightly, as if considering leaving. A gentle voice stopped her. A young black waitress stood nearby, wearing a burgundy apron over a black shirt. Her name tag read, Aisha. She carried a tray in one hand, but her smile was warm and immediate. "Let me help you," Aisha said, stepping closer. "We've got a booth right over here." Without waiting for Eleanor to protest, she guided her carefully to a small corner booth near the window. Aisha pulled out the chair and waited patiently while Eleanor lowered herself into it. "Would you like some water first?" Aisha asked. Eleanor nodded, her fingers trembling slightly. As Aisha walked away, a man seated 2 booths down glanced over. He was in his late 30s, well dressed in a navy suit. His name was Daniel Whitmore, Eleanor's son. He had insisted on meeting her for lunch, though he had arrived early and chosen a separate table to take a business call. He watched carefully. When Aisha returned, she didn't rush. She noticed Eleanor struggling with the menu and gently offered, "Would you like me to read today's specials to you?" Eleanor smiled faintly. "My eyes aren't what they used to be." "That's all right," Aisha said. "Mine are pretty good. I'll share them with you." Daniel ended his call but didn't move. He observed the interaction quietly. He saw how Aisha leaned in to hear Eleanor better, how she spoke slowly, kindly, how she didn't show the slightest irritation when Eleanor asked her to repeat something twice. When Eleanor's hands shook trying to lift her teacup, Aisha subtly steadied it for her. No one else seemed to notice, but Daniel did. And something about it unsettled him, not because it was wrong, but because it was rare. He had seen many waiters in his time. Most were efficient. Some were polite. Few were patient. Aisha was different. By the time the food arrived, Eleanor was smiling in a way Daniel hadn't seen in months, and he couldn't ignore it anymore. He stood up. He walked toward their booth, and as he approached, he heard his mother say softly to the waitress, "You remind me of someone I used to know. Someone very kind." Aisha simply smiled. Daniel stopped in his tracks. Something had just begun, though he didn't yet know what. Chapter 2. A Small Act. Daniel slid into the booth across from his mother just as Aisha placed the plate down carefully. "Your soup, I let it cool a little so it won't burn you." Eleanor beamed. "You think of everything." Daniel extended his hand politely. "I'm Daniel, her son." Aisha shook it briefly. "Nice to meet you." Her grip was confident, not timid, not overly friendly, just professional. Daniel studied her face for a moment. She couldn't have been more than 25. There was a quiet strength in her posture, the kind that comes from carrying more than trays. "She's been taking very good care of you," Daniel said to his mother. Eleanor nodded. "Better care than some nurses I've had." Aisha laughed softly. "Well, I try my best." After she walked away, Daniel leaned closer. "Mom, you seem happy." "I am," Eleanor whispered. "It's nice when someone sees you." Daniel frowned slightly. "Sees you?" "When you get old," she said gently, "people stop looking at you. They look through you. Like you're already gone." Her words hit him harder than he expected. He glanced over at Aisha, who was now balancing 3 plates effortlessly while checking on another elderly customer across the room. Daniel had built a successful real estate company from nothing. He prided himself on efficiency, discipline, and sharp decisions. He had little patience for excuses, but watching Aisha, He saw something money couldn't buy. Care. When the bill came, Daniel reached for it automatically. But before he could slip his card inside, he noticed something. The total was smaller than expected. He scanned it again. One meal had been removed. He looked up sharply. Aisha was at the counter, speaking to the cook. Daniel stood and walked over. "I think there's a mistake," he said evenly, holding up the receipt. Aisha glanced at it. "No mistake. You didn't charge for her tea and pie." Aisha shrugged lightly. "She reminded me of my grandmother. It's on me." Daniel blinked. "You paid for it yourself." She nodded casually. "It's just pie." Just pie. To Daniel, it was more than that. It was dignity. It was respect. It was humanity in a world that had grown too rushed to notice the fragile. He studied her again, this time not as a waitress, but as a person. And he made a decision. One that would change all their lives. He didn't know it yet. But kindness has a way of circling back. And sometimes, it returns in ways no one expects. Chapter 3 and 4. Chapter 3. The secret Daniel keeps. Daniel did not sleep well that night. The image replayed in his mind over and over. Aisha steadying his mother's trembling hands, lowering her voice so Eleanor wouldn't strain to hear, slipping that slice of pie onto the table as if it were nothing. Just pie. But Daniel knew better. In his world, nothing was just anything. Everything had value. Everything had cost. And genuine kindness, real, uncalculated kindness, was rare currency. The next morning, he arrived early at Whitmore Developments, the glass tower downtown that bore his family name in polished silver letters. From the 18th floor, the city looked small, manageable, predictable, unlike people. He pressed the intercom. "Megan, clear my 2 p.m. meeting." "Sir, that's the Riverton contract." "Reschedule it." There was a pause. "Yes, Mr. Whitmore." At 1:45 p.m., Daniel stepped back into Maple Street Diner. The lunch rush was in full swing. Plates clattered. Orders were called out. Coffee poured endlessly. Aisha was moving quickly between tables, her expression calm despite the chaos. She noticed him. "You're back," she said, surprised but composed. "I am." He gestured toward an empty booth. "Do you get breaks?" She raised an eyebrow slightly. "Eventually." "I'd like 5 minutes." There was something in his tone, not demanding, not flirtatious. Serious. She nodded toward the kitchen. "Give me a second." Moments later, she slid into the booth across from him, wiping her hands on her apron. "Is your mother all right?" "She's fine," Daniel said. "She keeps talking about you." Aisha smiled softly. "She's sweet." Daniel studied her again. Up close, he noticed faint shadows beneath her eyes. Fatigue. Responsibility. "Why did you pay for her pie?" he asked. She shrugged. "Because she looked like she needed something small to brighten her day." "And you do that often?" "When I can." Daniel leaned back slightly. "Do you have family here?" "My grandmother," she said. "She raised me. She's not well." There it was. The weight behind her eyes. "She lives with you." "Hospital bills make that hard," she replied carefully. "I'm working double shifts." Daniel was quiet. He wasn't unfamiliar with struggle. He had grown up modestly before, building his fortune. But somewhere along the climb, he had begun evaluating people by output, by efficiency, by what they could produce. Aisha produced something entirely different. Humanity. "I run a company," Daniel said finally. She blinked. "I figured." "I'm looking for someone to manage. Community outreach for a new development project. Someone who understands people." She stared at him. "I serve coffee," she said. "You do more than that." Silence stretched between them. "I don't have a degree," she added. "I don't care." She folded her arms slightly, cautious. "Why me?" Daniel didn't hesitate. "Because my mother said something yesterday. She said you saw her. Most people don't." Aisha looked down at her hands. "I'm not offering charity," Daniel continued. I'm offering opportunity. She exhaled slowly. I'd need flexible hours. For my grandmother. Daniel nodded once. Done. The bell above the diner door chimed again as customers entered. Life moved on around them. But in that booth, something shifted. Not rescue. Not pity. Recognition. And Aisha, for the first time in years, allowed herself to imagine something bigger than survival. Chapter 4. The Interview. 3 days later, Aisha stood in the lobby of Whitmore Developments. The floors gleamed like mirrors. The air smelled faintly of polished wood and quiet ambition. She had borrowed a blazer from a friend. It fit slightly tight at the shoulders, but she stood tall anyway. The receptionist smiled politely. You're here for Mr. Whitmore? Yes. Upstairs, Daniel watched. Through the glass wall of the conference room as she stepped off the elevator. She didn't shrink. That impressed him most. When she entered the room, she held out a neatly organized folder. I updated my resume, she said. He glanced at it. Diner experience. Volunteer work at a local senior center. Coordinating food drives. No corporate background. Perfect. I don't want you behind a desk, Daniel said. I want you talking to residents. Listening to concerns. Making sure our projects actually help the community. She studied him carefully. And if they don't, then we fix them. Most companies don't. I'm not most companies. She considered that. Why does this matter to you? She asked. Daniel hesitated. Because my mother is fading. Because I built buildings but forgot people. Because yesterday I saw what real value looks like. Instead, he said simply, because I'm learning. A faint smile touched her lips. Salary? She asked boldly. Daniel almost laughed. More than you make here. Health insurance? Yes. She swallowed slightly at that. For my grandmother too. He nodded. That was the moment her composure cracked, not visibly, not dramatically, but her eyes glistened. She looked away quickly. I'll need to give notice at the diner. Of course. As she stood to leave, Daniel added, one more thing. She paused. My mother doesn't know about this. Why? I want to see her reaction when she finds out. Aisha smiled. She'll be proud of you. Daniel wasn't sure about that, but for the first time in a long time, he felt something unfamiliar. Not ambition. Not pressure. Hope. Outside, the city buzzed like always. Inside, a waitress walked out of a glass tower with a job offer that would change her life. And Daniel Whitmore realized something unexpected. The smallest acts echo the loudest. Chapter 5 and 6. Chapter 5. A Hidden Past. Aisha's last shift at Maple Street Diner was quieter than usual. Word had spread quickly. She's moving up, one cook said proudly. Don't forget us when you're rich, another joked. But Aisha wasn't thinking about money. She was thinking about her grandmother. That night, she sat beside her grandmother's hospital bed, gently massaging her fragile hands. The machines hummed softly in the dim room. The scent of antiseptic filled the air. Grandma, she whispered, I got a new job. Her grandmother, Miriam, opened her tired eyes slowly. At the diner? No, something bigger. Miriam studied her granddaughter carefully. You look scared. Aisha laughed softly. I am. Good, Miriam replied weakly. It means it matters. Aisha rested her forehead gently against their joined hands. They're giving us insurance. We won't have to worry about bills the same way anymore. Her grandmother smiled faintly. You always worried too much about me. You raised me, Aisha said. After Mom passed. After everything. The room fell quiet. Her childhood had not been simple. Her mother had died when she was 8. Her father had disappeared long before that. It was Miriam who worked 2 cleaning jobs to keep food on the table. Miriam who attended every school play. Miriam who taught her that dignity wasn't about wealth. It's about how you treat people when you don't need anything from them. Her grandmother used to say. That lesson had followed Aisha everywhere. Even to a diner. Even to a slice of pie. The next morning, she walked into Whitmore Developments for her first official day. Daniel introduced her to the executive team. Some were polite, some skeptical. One older executive leaned toward Daniel and muttered, "She doesn't look like our usual hire." Daniel didn't miss the tone. "She's exactly what we need," he replied evenly. Aisha noticed the tension, but she didn't shrink. She took notes. She asked thoughtful questions. She listened more than she spoke. By afternoon, she was reviewing plans for a housing redevelopment project in Riverton, a low-income neighborhood Whitmore. Developments planned to revitalize. As she read the documents, her expression shifted. "This displaces 38 families," she said quietly. "It relocates them," an executive corrected. "To where?" she asked. Silence. Daniel watched her carefully. "There's no detailed relocation support," she continued. "Just temporary vouchers." "That's standard," someone said. "It shouldn't be." The room grew still. Daniel felt something stir in him. Not defiance. Integrity. "Draft a proposal," he said calmly. "Full relocation assistance. Long-term rent stabilization. Community input panels." The executive stared. "That will cut profits," one protested. Daniel's voice remained steady. "Then we adjust." Aisha looked at him, not with gratitude, but with respect. For the first time, Daniel realized something humbling. He hadn't hired her to teach others. He had hired her to teach him. Chapter 6. The Hospital Call. 2 weeks into her new role, Aisha's phone rang during a strategy meeting. She normally ignored calls during work, but when she saw the hospital's number, her stomach dropped. She stepped into the hallway. "Yes." "Miss Thompson, your grandmother's condition has worsened. You should come." The world narrowed. "I'm on my way." She returned to the conference room, her face pale but composed. "I need to leave," she said. Daniel stood immediately. "Go." "I'm sorry." "Go." She didn't argue. 40 minutes later, Daniel found himself doing something he hadn't planned. He was driving to the hospital. When he arrived, he saw her through the glass doors of the ICU waiting area. She sat alone, elbows on her knees, hands clasped tightly. She looked small. Not weak. Just human. He approached quietly. "How is she?" Aisha looked up, startled. "You didn't have to come." "I know." She swallowed. "They're not sure she'll make the night." Daniel sat beside her. He had never been good with hospitals. His father had died in one 15 years earlier. Cold corridors. White walls. Final words that never felt complete. "I thought I had more time," Aisha whispered. Daniel didn't offer empty comfort. Instead, he said gently, "Tell me about her." Aisha blinked, surprised. "She's stubborn," she said, managing a faint smile. "She used to say the world doesn't owe you fairness, but you owe it kindness." Daniel exhaled slowly. "That sounds like someone I'd like." They sat in silence. Hours passed. Eventually, a doctor approached. Aisha stood before he even spoke. The words were soft, clinical, final. She didn't cry immediately. She walked into the room. Daniel stayed behind, giving her space. Through the glass, he saw her lean over the bed, pressing her forehead to her grandmother's hand. And something shifted inside him again. This wasn't about business anymore. This wasn't about projects or profits. This was about legacy, the kind you leave in people. Later, as they walked out of the hospital together, Aisha finally broke. Not loudly, not dramatically, just quiet tears under streetlights. Daniel placed his jacket over her shoulders. And for the first time in years, he didn't feel like a CEO. He felt like a son. And he understood something clearly. Kindness is not small. It is inheritance. Chapter 7. Truth at the Table. The funeral was small. Just a handful of neighbors, a pastor, 2 nurses from the hospital, and Daniel. Aisha hadn't expected him to come. He stood quietly in the back, hands folded, listening as Aisha spoke about her grandmother's strength, about sacrifice, about working 2 jobs and still finding time to read bedtime stories, about teaching her that character is what you do when no one applauds. When it was over, Daniel stepped forward. "She raised someone remarkable," he said simply. Aisha nodded. Everything good in me came from her. Then she succeeded. Days passed. Aisha returned to work sooner than Daniel expected. You don't have to rush, he told her. I'm not rushing, she replied gently. I need purpose right now. And she worked. Not as distraction, but as intention. The Riverton project began to transform under her influence. Community meetings were scheduled in local churches instead of corporate offices. Families were invited to speak. Concerns were documented. Adjustments were made. The Riverton project began to transform under her influence. Community meetings were scheduled in local churches instead of corporate offices. Families were invited to speak. Concerns were documented. Adjustments were made. For the first time in company history, Whitmore Developments published a public commitment to zero forced displacement without permanent housing alternatives. Investors questioned it. The board pushed back. Daniel held firm. One afternoon, he brought his mother to the nearly completed Riverton site. Eleanor walked slowly with her cane, examining the buildings with curious eyes. These are beautiful, she said. They're affordable housing units, Daniel explained, with long-term protections. She glanced at him knowingly. This wasn't your original plan. No. And what changed? Daniel looked across the courtyard where Aisha was speaking with a group of residents, listening intently as an elderly man explained concerns about wheelchair accessibility. That waitress, he said quietly. Eleanor smiled. Later that day, Daniel arranged something special. He invited Aisha to Maple Street Diner. When they arrived, Eleanor was already seated in their usual corner booth. Aisha froze slightly when she saw her. Mrs. Whitmore. Eleanor reached for her hand. Sit with us. They ordered tea and pie. Daniel waited until the waitress stepped away before speaking. Mom, he said gently, Aisha doesn't work here anymore. Eleanor blinked. She doesn't. No, Daniel said. She works with me. Aisha looked down, slightly embarrassed. Eleanor's eyes widened. You hired her? Yes. There was a long silence. Then Eleanor turned to Aisha. Good, she said firmly. He needed someone to teach him how to see. Daniel laughed softly. And for the first time in a long while, all three of them sat not as strangers from different worlds, but as something closer, connected not by transaction, but by kindness. Chapter 8. The Echo of Kindness. 1 year later, Whitmore Developments looked different. Not physically, though new projects reflected more community care, but internally. A new department existed, Community Impact and Outreach. Its director was Aisha Thompson. Her office walls were lined with photographs, not awards. Not accolades, but people. Families at ribbon cuttings. Children playing in safe courtyards. Seniors seated comfortably on accessible balconies. Daniel knocked lightly on her open door. Got a minute? Always. He stepped inside and placed a folder on her desk. What's this? She asked. Scholarship Fund. She opened it slowly. Miriam Thompson Community Grant, she read softly. It'll support students who want to work in community development, but can't afford school. Aisha covered her mouth briefly. You didn't have to. Yes, Daniel said gently. I did. They stood in silence for a moment.